The courtroom breathed a restless morning hum. Paper folders opening and closing, a soft shuffle of shoes along the aisle, the murmur of whispered questions that sounded like wind under a door. From another division came the crisp crack of a gavel, a stray sound that leapt across walls and landed here as a reminder. Order first, everything else second. Judge Mirabelle Ortiz sat at the bench with her left palm on the smooth mesquite rail. The wood had been polished by years of work, by hands steady and shaking, by days like this one and worse days too. She told herself the thought she always used to center a day. Another docket, another case, another set of facts to weigh and then set aside. The bailiff lifted his clipboard and intoned. On calendar, state of New Mexico versus Rafael Cruz. A small muscle twitched near Mirabelle's jaw. She let it pass, reached for the first page atop her stack, and read the charges out of habit rather than need. Aggravated battery, commercial burglary, resisting arrest. The words were metal tags clipped to a life she did not yet know. They brought with them a familiar heaviness. Something that was not quite anger, not quite sadness, but the weight that comes from watching people enter a story already bent. The deputies brought him in at the end of short chains, wrists and ankles, moving with the careful steps of a man who had learned that floors can shift beneath you. He did not look up right away. When he did, the room tilted and the years tilted with it. It was him. It was Rafael. For the first time in her career, the gavel shifted under Mirabelle's hand. It did not fall. She did not falter. Still, she felt the edge of it bite into her palm, and she knew the moment had engraved itself into wood and into her memory. Rafael looked up once and saw her. Recognition flared, bright as a spark thrown off a grinder, then closed itself swiftly, the way people learn to close a door in rooms that do not belong to them. He lowered his gaze. The murmur in the gallery thinned into a single expectant silence. Mr. Cruz, Mirabelle said, her voice steady. You stand accused of aggravated battery, commercial burglary, and resisting arrest. How do you plead? His voice was roughened by weathering years, but the shape of it had not changed. Not guilty, Your Honor. She nodded because the record needed it, because the ritual helped the room remember itself, and because the ritual helped her too. Counsel appearances. Thomas Gleason for the state, said the prosecutor, a man with a neat tie and a jaw that did not lend itself to compromise. Priya Nair for Mr. Cruz, said the defender, her tone calm and her posture quiet in the way that suggests steadiness is a practice and not an accident. Proceed with openings, Mirabelle said, and the gears of the morning took hold. Gleason stepped into the aisle with the efficiency of a man who believed in straight lines. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, this is simple. A late-night argument at a gas station market off the interstate. A clerk injured. A till emptied. A suspect detained 3 blocks away with cash consistent with store proceeds. Follow the facts. They lead to one conclusion. He sat as if he had returned a tool to its drawer. Priya rose without hurry. She set her hands at the sides of the lectern and let the silence firm itself before she spoke. The state will say that simple equals true, she said. Sometimes that's so. Not today. Today is a silhouette in poor light, a jacket nobody found, a time stamp that skips, and a stop based on general description and proximity. Mr. Cruz has said from the first hour that he did not do this. When you hold the evidence up to the standard the law demands, you will feel the weight of a reasonable doubt the state cannot shake. Mirabelle kept her face still and let her eyes move across the jurors. A woman in the front row leaned forward a fraction, as if listening were a kind of work she had been trained to do. A man near the end of the box glanced from Priya to Gleason and back again, weighing tone as much as content. Mirabelle turned a page. The paper rasped beneath her fingers and carried her, uninvited but unstoppable, to an old afternoon near Arroyo Verde, where the drainage ditch caught a thin silver water, and a boy of 13 cursed a knot with inventive language that made her laugh. She remembered offering to help. She remembered his quick grin, a flash as sudden and generous as summer rain. She remembered bicycles riding berms where juniper clung to dust. She remembered a porch swing groaning in wind that tasted of dry sage. She remembered her father's voice, hard with a love that came out like a lock. Inside. Now. She remembered Raphael saying softly, "It's okay. Go on. I'll catch you later." And she remembered how later never came. Not for years, not in any honest way. She set the page down and stayed in the room. There was no other honest place to be. The clerk from a market took the stand, Nate Chambers, early 20s, a face doing its best not to show nerves. He told the jury about the man who came in wearing a navy windbreaker, hood up. There had been a short argument over battery prices, a quick lunge, a hit that made his ribs hum, hands on the register, and a scramble. When asked if the attacker sat in the courtroom, he glanced toward Raphael and then away. "I think so," he said. "It looks like him." It sounded more like a feeling than a conclusion. Priya's cross-examination moved thoughtfully, one careful step at a time. "You said the hood was up?" "Yes." "And the lights near that counter flicker?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "Did you see the face clearly?" "Not really." "When officers detained Mr. Cruz, did you see them recover a Navy windbreaker from him?" "I don't know," he said. "I didn't see one." "Thank you," she said, and let the silence rest. The state played the video. Lights dimmed, and a monitor breathed a grainy certainty into being. A hooded figure entered the frame. There was a short, hard movement across the counter. The picture stuttered, jumped, and then ended, less like a complete sentence than like a word cut off mid-syllable. Gleason let silence do half his work. "The state will show this is a defendant," he said, and clicked the screen dark again. The jurors looked at each other in small ways, expressions that were not agreement and not disbelief. Something in between the two, something rooms like this see 1,000 times and never fully resolve. They broke for lunch. Mirabelle walked back to Chambers with measured steps. Her clerk, Clara Sandoval, hovered at the threshold with the respectful caution of someone approaching a skittish animal. "Judge," she said, "you seemed a little far away. Do you need anything?" Mirabelle stacked her papers into 2 neat squares. She weighed how much truth could live safely inside her duty. "I could use your eyes on the jury notes. Tighten them a shade." Clara nodded. There are doors one does not open unless asked to. She collected a pen, made herself a short list, and moved like someone protecting a fragile flame. The afternoon brought Sergeant Mark Ellison to the stand. Boots planted, shoulders squared, a confidence burnished by 1,000 traffic stops. He testified that he detained Raphael because the broadcast description matched. Hispanic male, late 30s, dark jeans jacket. Because of proximity and hour. Because training and instinct aligned. Priya's questions threaded through the spaces where words left room to breathe. The witness said, "Navy windbreaker, correct?" "Yes." "Did you find such a windbreaker on my client when you detained him?" "No." "Did you conduct a canvass, alleys, dumpsters, rooftops within a 3 to 4 block radius for discarded clothing?" "Not exhaustive," he said. "Resources were limited. We prioritized containment." "So you arrested on a general description and proximity, without locating the one physical item your eyewitness used to fix the identification?" "We had probable cause," he replied, and the phrase settled in the room like a shield made of rules. The defense called Dr. Lintran, who fit the witness chair the way a craftsman fits a bench. She spoke about digital video as if time were a thing you could hold and weigh. She had examined the export and found the index out of sequence. Frames that stepped backward a tenth of a second, forward 4/10, and then stopped at 17.2 seconds, where a system log suggested nearly 22. She could not say whether the gap was software error, interrupted export, or manual trim. She could say the clip was not continuous. As for the person in the frame, she used anchor measurements, the counter height, shelf spacing, exit sign, and derived a range of possible height too wide to bind to one individual. Clothing color in that light, with that compression, she added, was a guess masquerading as a fact. The jurors listened the way plants leaned toward any patch of sun. A few took notes. One stopped and simply watched Dr. Tran's hands as she traced the idea of time with her fingers. Raphael chose to testify. The room's temperature shifted a degree. He said he had been at a friend's garage, late, trying to bully a stubborn gasket back into good behavior. He left on foot, cut across Agua Fria. A cruiser rolled up. He put his hands where they could see. "They told me I fit what they were looking for," he said. "After that, it moved fast." He did not sand his past smooth. He said he had made mistakes and been where he should not have been and trusted the wrong people. But I didn't do this, he said. I'm tired of being an image in other people's heads instead of a sequence of things that actually happened. I want what happened to matter more than how I look walking at night under dull lamps. Gleason pressed at the seams where shame might hide, other arrests, prior wrongs, and met a wall. Objection, Priya said. 404B. Sustained, Mirabelle ruled. Gleason pivoted to proximity and cash. You had more cash than most people carry, he said. You wanted to have a receipt for every dollar I touch. Raphael asked, not defiant, just tired. Some weeks I get paid partial in cash. The room breathed with him. They adjourned. Mirabelle watched too long as deputies guided Raphael through the door, his chains whispering against the floor. She traced a mesquite rail with 2 fingers the way a person might touch a ship's railing before descent, then returned to chambers where the day was broken down into neat piles. Clara stacked files and said, My Tio always said the law is a house. You live there, but you still have to fix the leaks. Mirabelle allowed herself a small smile. Wise man, she said, and they tidied the day into folders that made the work look simpler than it felt. The next morning opened with light poured over adobe like thin brass. The jurors filed in like notes arranged on a staff. Closings, Mirabelle said. Gleason asked the jurors to trust the lines that had carried all of them here. The process, the training, the probabilities. You don't need every piece when the picture is clear, he said. A clerk injured, a register emptied, a suspect nearby with cash. Trust the process. Priya asked them to trust the standard instead. Don't trust hunches or habits. Trust proof. You were shown a partial picture. You were told about a jacket that never made an appearance. You heard an officer say resources were limited and imply that a gap is a small thing. You heard a man repeat a simple story in the same steady way because it is the one steady thing he has. The law asks you to be sure beyond a reasonable doubt. The state has not walked you that far. Mirabelle read the instructions cleanly and without elaboration, sent the jury to its room, and watched the courthouse shift into the special slow time of deliberation. The gallery emptied and refilled, emptied again. Scribbles found their way into notebooks. Coffee cooled in forgotten cups. A bailiff cleared his throat and then apologized to nobody in particular. People pretended to work. People pretended not to stare at the jury door. They have a verdict, the bailiff announced at last. Everyone stood, then sat. The foreperson held a piece of paper that shook like a small earth. In the matter of the state of New Mexico versus Rafael Cruz, she said, we find the defendant not guilty. Air change weight. Somewhere in the gallery, a sound that was almost laughter and almost grief escaped at the same time. Mirabelle tapped her gavel, not to flatten the room, but to return it to a shape it could hold. The jury has spoken, she said. Mr. Cruz, you are released. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are excused with the court's gratitude. Papers were signed. Chairs were pushed in. The room returned to wood and light. Raphael approached the well and stopped where respect draws a line. You don't owe me anything, he said quietly. But I want to ask, why didn't you say it out loud? You knew me. Mirabelle felt the porch swing of memory creak beneath her. Because I couldn't, she said. I had to be fair. If I made it about us, I could have broken the case in the wrong way. He let the word fair sit on his tongue a moment. Some of us start the race in sand, he said. There was no accusation in it. It was terrain, described accurately. You're right, she said. I wish I had done more then. I wish I could have done more now. He studied her like a person testing whether a bridge can hold a load. We were kids, he said. We didn't know the rules. He tipped his chin. You know them now. I do, she answered. The apology needed no ornament. He nodded, small, sufficient, and walked into the hallway light with his back straight and his future unnamed. Mirabelle remained a moment longer and listened to the aftersound of the place. Courtrooms breathe in their own way when the people leave, a slow, even sound, like waves very far away. She had held the law to its own measure, and the law had held water this time. The weak had also pried up a floorboard and shown what ran underneath. Habits shortcuts, rules uses fences instead of tools. Outside, the air wore that late gold color New Mexico does better than any place she had ever lived. She did not make a speech to the steps. She went to her desk, opened a fresh document, and typed a header that did not care about drama. She saved the document, sent a meeting invitation to the presiding judge, added 3 names that would roll their eyes and 2 that would not, and closed her laptop. The days after the verdict stretched back toward routine, arraignments, motions, plea agreements, trials. The machinery looked ordinary again, made almost entirely of small decisions taken seriously. Mirabelle listened differently now. When someone said, "We prioritize a perimeter," she asked, "What did you leave undone, and does leaving it undone change what you think you know?" When a prosecutor said, "The video shows what matters," she asked, "What does it not show, and how do you know?" When a defender spoke of fear in the neighborhood, she did not mistake fear for a void. She took it as a sign to look for another way through. On a Saturday, she drove to Arroyo Verde, because sometimes you go back to a place not for answers, but to be honest about questions. The ditch still carried its thin thread. The cottonwoods still flung shade like hands raised against heat. She parked, sat on the hood of her car, and let the wind comb the dry grass. She thought of a boy cursing a knot, of a man speaking steadily into a microphone with a chain at his ankle, of a clerk who had done his best to remember a face he had never truly seen, of an officer who had considered a perimeter a kind of completion, of a scientist who taught a room to see time in frames. She did not turn any of them into symbols. She let them rest as people. When she drove back into town, she did not feel lighter, not exactly. She felt oriented, the way a map snaps back into place after slipping off the page. Word about her memo did what such things do. It did not explode. It traveled like a change in weather, fell before it was seen. Assistants told one another, "The judge is asking for logs now. Have them." Supervisors told patrol, "You will be questioned about canvases. Be ready with more than a shrug." The public defender's office told its first years, "If your client swears he was at his cousin's place and the cousin is terrified, ask for the liaison hour. Use it. Save it for clients who are telling you straight. And check your gut twice before you stamp someone honest, or not, because you will be wrong sometimes." Because the world is not a parable, there was pushback. A letter arrived from the police union, shaped like a warning wrapped in respect. It said the court's inquiries risk second-guessing split-second decisions. It said morale was low. It said asking for canvases meant someone else would go unprotected. Mirabelle read it twice without heat. She wrote a short reply in the plainest tone she had. She said the court's job was to test whether evidence was strong and fairly gathered, not to be an officer. Questions asked in daylight make decisions better, not worse. She made no speech. She sent it. She filed both letters where they belonged, and she went back to the morning calendar. A cousin case landed on her docket. State versus Bailey. At first glance, it looked like a sibling to the one that had almost taken Raphael. A cheap electronics store off Cirillo's, a rush in a blur, a frightened clerk, the same old video in worse light. The arrest came quickly. The suspect, Cora Bailey, looked like a person life had folded and refolded to make smaller. By coincidence or care, Priya stood for the defense. The state sent a different prosecutor, Alicia Murrow, whose sentences were tight as seams. Alicia's open was built to make heads nod. The store had a theft pattern. The manager had kept an eye on loss. The camera showed a body shape and a particular backpack patch caught in one frame, a red iron-on flame that matched the patch on Cora's bag. Officers stopped Cora near the bus stop. She had a handful of memory cards and a roll of cash. "None of this is complicated," Alicia said. "You will see that." Priya's opening was direct. Yes, the backpack was Cora's. Yes, she had memory cards. Yes, she had cash. No, she didn't rob anyone that night. Her explanation was unglamorous and consistent. Cora had bought the bag secondhand, flame patch included. She repaired used phones for cash and carried small parts because people brought her dead rectangles and a prayer. Her landlord wanted paper bills, not promises. You will hear why the video is shorter than what the system recorded. Priya said, and why that matters. The store manager wanted to be helpful more than he wanted to be right. He said the patch sure looked like the one on Cora's bag. He said he had been meaning to replace the camera for months, but budgets were like that. He said employees had told him, a lot of people steal, and after a while you learn to read the walk of it. Priya's cross was short and exact. You're sure the patch looks similar? Yes. You agree a dozen different brands sell flame patches like that? Now that you mention it, yes. Do you have any record of the camera's last service? No. Do your logs show continuity? I don't know. Thank you. When the state played the clip, Dr. Lin Tran sat on the back bench without being called, watching like someone who prefers to be certain before being paid to be certain. The video flickered in the way Mirabelle now recognized. Alicia pressed through, as if the flicker were cosmetic rather than structural. Later, when it was the defense's turn, Dr. Tran took the stand and explained the bones under the skin. The export index drops frames 5 times in the critical 15 seconds, she said. The system log shows a power dipped a week prior that was never corrected in settings. As for the flame patch, color bleed at low lux can turn a triangular logo into a round one. I'm not proving it's not Ms. Bailey. I'm proving this clip cannot tell you that it is. Alicia's face did not move. Professionals concede what cannot be held and hold what remains. She argued in closing that even if the video had holes, proximity and possession filled them. Cora, near the bus stop shortly after the theft, with goods that looked like store stock and more cash than a freelancer might earn in a day. You do not need a new standard, she said. The old one is enough. Priya said the old one was perfect, if you use it the way it was written. Doubt is not a moral failure, she told the jurors. It's a legal instruction. They found Cora not guilty. Alicia took the loss without dramatics. She shook Priya's hand and told the manager in a soft voice that they would talk about upgrades. She packed her file and left with the walk of a person who knows there will be another case before lunch. Cora did not cry. She did not thank the court. She left with Priya and the public defender investigator who had found the second-hand shop where that same flame patch had been sold months before. Some outcomes are quiet even for the people inside them. Evenings, Mirabelle took tea instead of coffee. Coffee made her think she could push longer. Tea told the truth. She and Clara adjusted the memo, which had become a simple bench policy. 3 pages, clear as river stone. They added a line that said missing video continuity would trigger a short foundation hearing or a cautionary instruction. They added a line about canvases, not a rule about distance, blocks vary neighborhood to neighborhood, but a rule about effort. If a key item was likely discarded, ask for help, search smartly, and record both the request and the answer. People are talking about the dashboards, Clara said one evening. The ones that track stops, searches, and charges. Good. Mirabelle said, not a celebration, but as a mark on a map. They'll say you're soft on crime, Clara warned. They will, Mirabelle agreed, will publish the numbers until they're boring. Boring truth does the quiet work. A knock. Alicia Murrow leaned in with unusual hesitation. Judge, do you have 5 minutes? Mirabelle gestured to the chair. My dad ran a pawn shop, Alicia said, sitting without settling. He kept a bat behind the counter and a coffee can under it. He never fixed his cameras either. Not because he didn't care, because the money always needed to go somewhere else. I'll train our witnesses to tell the truth without getting defensive about budgets. I thought you should know someone is listening. Thank you, Mirabelle said, and left the thanks plain. Raphael's life did not transform. It unfolded in workable inches. He picked up more jobs, the kind where someone says, the dealership quoted me something that would buy a week of groceries. And he says, bring it Saturday and we'll see. He found a rhythm he could stand inside. He rose before the sun most days. He walked when his mind chewed too hard on old habits. He kept a small cash box under the passenger seat and a notebook with lines of what came in and what went out. He rigged a tarp for shade when the heat refused to lose. A neighbor brought limeade and asked if he took checks. He laughed. Not yet. Maybe later. He meant it as a joke and also as the outline of a future. A patrol car idled near his spot one afternoon long enough to sour the back of his throat. A young officer got out and said cars matching descriptions had been seen in the area. He asked for names. He looked like a person trying to do his job inside rules that had grown heavy in his hands. Raphael kept his voice even. He offered his own name, the list of plates he was working on, and a wrinkled notebook. "You can call Mr. Randall or Ms. Asa," he said. "Receipts are messy, but they're real." The officer skimmed the notebook, not as a trap, but as a map of an honest life. He nodded, returned to his car, and drove away. Raphael stood in the big warm air until his body remembered how to breathe like it belonged to him. Later, he found a bolt that would not turn and laughed, because it was always the small things that asked for patience you didn't know you had. Priya stopped by the shade roof one evening to collect a client's beater, sedan the client couldn't collect by day. She leaned on the fender and told Raphael, voice equal parts fatigue and pride, that the defender's office had scraped together grant money for a part-time investigator to run the liaison hour. "It saved 2 people from being charged on nothing more than a hunch," she said. "How do you measure a thing like that?" he asked. "You don't measure it in headlines," she said. "You measure it in mornings where somebody goes to work instead of a cell." He nodded. That sounded like the right math. Sergeant Ellison crossed Mirabelle's courtroom again on another case. His jaw had lost a little iron. He still answered firmly, but when asked about a canvas, he did not reach for his old shield. "We were short that night," he said. "I logged a request for additional units. It was denied. I should have asked for volunteers from the next district. I know a couple of officers who would have come on their own time if I'd asked. I didn't ask. I should have." The words did not change the facts of his case. They changed the pressure in the room for a few breaths. He looked at the jurors and did not cast himself as a martyr to bureaucracy. He let the admission be exactly what it was. The dashboard pilot came together with the usual friction of software and the extra friction of government. An IT specialist named Devin sat in chambers with a laptop that had seen too much duty and showed a mock-up. No names, just blocks, percentages, trend lines, filters. You could see, by month and area, how many stops resulted in searches, and how often those searches found what the officer said they were looking for. You could check what happened after refresher trainings, whether the lines drifted, rose, or refused to move. Mirabelle said the charts had to be simple enough for people who do not love charts. Devin said that would be harder to build. Mirabelle smiled. Hard and useful beats easy and ignored. A newspaper editorial did precisely what Mirabelle had told Clara it would do. It called the court meddlesome. It said criminals would walk. It said numbers were an insult to brave. She read it end to end and declined to answer. Another paper ran a story about the store manager from the Bailey case. He had ordered a new camera. The vendor had thrown in training, not out of generosity but self-preservation. "I feel less scared at night," the manager said, "because now I know what my system can do and what it can't. Knowing is a kind of safety." Together, the editorial and the interview told a truer thing than either could alone. Mirabelle clipped neither. She taped nothing to her wall. She kept her questions up and her head down. Winter came, and with it a case where the bench policy mattered visibly. The defendant, Marlon Fern, was accused in a string of car window smashing grabs near a trailhead. The state had a park camera, old, stingy, set to motion detection. The figure's walk looked like Marlon's if he wanted it to. He had a jacket that could be called navy. He also had badge scanner logs from a factory line that placed him on the floor for all but one of the nights in question. The DA argued the breaks were long enough to run the 2 miles, break glass, and return, as the production lines forgive the absence of one set of hands on schedule. The foundation hearing took 30 minutes. The park camera had no continuity record at all. Its memory rolled over every 4 days. Nobody had pulled the full set quickly enough. Not malice, just thin budgets and habits that had never been challenged. Marlon's counsel asked to bind over only on the one night his shift ended early. The court granted the narrowed path. When that night finally went to trial, a juror asked in a note, "Will we see the rest of the camera footage from the other nights?" The answer was no. The footage no longer existed. The juror looked struck, not by a trick, but by the ordinary way pieces fall away. The case collapsed, not because somebody lied, but because gaps had been treated like small matters, and it turned out they were load-bearing. One morning after that hearing, A man waited near security for Mirabel to pass. He held his hat in his hands the way people do in stories. The deputy gave a nod. The man stepped forward. "Judge," he said, "my name is Fern. I'm Marlon's father. I'm not here to talk about the case. I know better. I just want to say my son isn't a saint, but he isn't a ghost either. He can't be in two places at once. Thank you for asking for the records that show where people are." He put his hat back on and left before she could answer. Some thanks do not want to be chased. Late in that winter, Raphael caught a flu that emptied his legs and then emptied his stubborn. He missed 3 days, fought on the 4th, sat under the tarp on a bucket and watched the light move, and finally yielded to common sense. A neighbor brought caldo and scolded him kindly. He slept because sleeping was cheaper than being dead. He wrote the lost income in his notebook and drew a line under it. Cost, he labeled the line, not failure. On the 5th day, he opened the toolbox. Gratitude, uninvited and loud, came the first bolt that turned clean. Spring arrived on hard wind. Hair misbehaved. Tempers shortened. Mirabel remembered to drink water and let lawyers finish sentences that tried to run long. A young ADA tried to treat doubt like misbehavior. Mirabel wrote a note on her pad. Teach doubt as courage. At a brown bag lunch for new attorneys, she said it aloud. You don't win against doubt, she told them. You bring proof that takes doubt gently by the hand and shows it where to sit. Treat doubt as a teacher. It will give you the questions you need. Clara came into Chambers with good news that was also hard news. She had a new job offer. She would leave in summer. They got coffee that tasted faintly of cinnamon and wrote a list of handoffs, and another projects that should die rather than outlive their owners. I told my abuela about the dashboards, Clara said. She nodded and said, Mija, numbers can lie, but they are less skilled at it than people are. Invite her to the next judge's meeting, Mirabel said, smiling. We could use that line. By summer, the dashboard pilot was live enough to show a first honest line. The find rate after stops was lower than anyone had guessed. After refresher training, the line rose modestly and then flattened again. That is how improvements usually behave. They come. The system swallows from the gains. People push again. Mirabel stared at the line and felt a small, earned satisfaction. The kind you feel when a leak stops and the floor dries and you can put the rug back without a curl at the edge. A year from the day of the verdict, Raphael closed early, sat on the bucket, and watched the sky give itself to evening. He thought of the courtroom not as a place that had saved him, but as a place where his life had not been taken. He thought of boys who rode with him and were now gone in complicated ways. He thought of the days ahead. He did not make promises with words. He made one with actions. He set his alarm, cleaned his sockets, put receipts in the notebook, checked his phone for customers who would pay late and still pay. He locked the toolbox. He went home. 2 days later, he saw Mirabel on a sidewalk near the courthouse. This time there was no grocery cart, no fluorescent aisle, just noon light and flat heat. He lifted a hand in a small wave. She lifted one back. Hope you're keeping the leaks in line, he said. I'm trying, she replied. That's the job, he said. They both smiled, not because anything was fixed forever, but because inches count, and sometimes inches are miles when you look back. There were other cases and other mornings. The work didn't become poetry. It stayed work. A string of acts done in order, a set of questions asked in a voice that didn't need to perform fairness because it was busy doing it. Priya won cases she should have, and lost some she should not have. Alicia trained new ADAs to bring logs with their videos and to teach store managers what maintenance truly meant. Sergeant Ellison transferred to training and began telling new officers to write down what they asked for, to ask twice if the first answer was no, and to treat a canvas as a way to honor a claim rather than a chore to avoid. Dr. Lynn Tran spoke at a community college class about forensics. A student stayed after to ask how to get into a field where you can make truth more stubborn. Start with math. Dr. Tran said, add patience. Add the willingness to explain the same concept 3 different ways until everyone understands. If anyone later tried to find the day things change, they could pick any of these and be partly right. The verdict, The memo, the foundation hearing about logs. The morning a sergeant said, "I should have asked." The day a manager upgraded a camera. The afternoon an officer chose to read a notebook like a map of an honest life. The evening a man decided to sleep instead of working himself into a fever. But there was no single day, because that isn't how houses stop leaking. You keep a toolbox near the door. You don't pretend the rain will never come. You accept that it will, and you get to work when it does, and sometimes before. Courtrooms continue breathing when we aren't there to hear them. The mesquite rail keeps its shine, a little more each year where hands and paper have taught it to glow. Mirabelle sets her palm on it before she speaks the name of the next case, not for luck, but for balance. Each case brings its own noise and its own quiet. Enough of them end where law and fact shake hands that she can sleep. The ones that don't, she files in the same mental drawer as stubborn bolts, skipped video frames, and nights that taught her a better question for next time. That is as much as any person can promise. It is not small. If you stand on the courthouse steps late, you will hear less than you expect. A janitor's cart will squeaking, flag halyards tapping the pole, your own breath, and maybe a laugh down the block where someone tells a joke to lose a day's weight. If you look up, you will see the same sky that watched a boy curse a knot and a girl pretend she didn't want to leave. You will understand that the work under that sky has always been the same, to tell the difference between a picture and a person, to slow down for the question that changes the answer, to hold a door open long enough for someone to walk through on their own feet and keep going. And so it goes, not with a banner, but with a steadying hand, with tools you can carry without making a show of them, with a promise renewed in the only way promises deserve to be renewed, in the morning when the room fills, when the first case is called, when the judge says good morning and means it, because the work is hard and the work is the point. By the second summer after the verdict, the courthouse had absorbed Mirabelle's policies so quietly that new lawyers thought they had always been there. The continuity questions on video evidence took 2 minutes and saved hours of argument later. The canvas logs, requested and filed, turned "we didn't have time" into a map of what had been tried and what had not. The dashboard, unshowy green and gray, sat on a public website where anyone could see the lines move, slow, stubborn, real. Clara moved across town to her new job and sent a postcard with a single sentence from her abuela. "Fix the leaks, Mija, and keep the receipts." Mirabelle taped it inside a cabinet instead of on the wall, where she would see it only when she reached for something she used every day. Alicia trained up a cohort of younger prosecutors who came to court with logs and chain of custody sheets already clipped to their exhibits. She still lost sometimes. She still won sometimes. She began to enjoy the trials where her case was stronger because the weak parts had been stripped out before they ever reached a jury. Sergeant Ellison, now in training, started his morning lecture with the same 2 sentences. Write down what you asked for. Ask again when you're told no. He didn't pretend to be the hero of his own story. He just taught what he wished someone had taught him. Dr. Lynn Tran found a second, calling one night a week in a windowless classroom at the community college, building a small army of patient skeptics who could explain a frame index without making anyone feel small. Her favorite compliment came from a janitor who paused in the doorway and said, "You make time sound like something I could hold." As for Raphael, his tar became a metal carport, and the carport became a bay with poured concrete, and the bay turned into a modest shop with a hand-lettered sign, Arroyo Auto, honest work, fair price. He got a cheap credit card reader, a better compressor, and a rolling stool that saved his knees. He lost a day to a bad alternator and 3 to a worse flu. He learned to call customers back even when the answer was, "I'm running behind." He learned that the answer was easier to hear at 5 in the afternoon than at 9 at night. On the day he signed the lease for the second bay, he set a folding table outside with a plastic tub of Pilates and a stack of paper cups for water. He did not cut a ribbon. He stood for a long minute, hands on the edge of the table, and let himself feel the ground under his boots. Then he went inside and put a new socket set in the top drawer. Mirabelle stopped by at closing. She parked down the block and walked the last stretch, not wanting the visit to feel like an inspection. He saw her in the doorway and wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better days. "Congratulations," she said. "Thank you," he answered. "It's mostly bolts and patience." "That's most things worth doing," she said. They stood in the warm air among the soft clicks of cooling metal. An old radio murmured a song they both knew without naming. He gestured toward the bays. She nodded toward the sign. There was so much they could have said, and so little they needed to. "I owe you nothing," he said at last, echoing another room on another day. "And I mean that as a compliment. It is." "I'll take it that way," she said. He offered her a lime polita. She took it. They ate in companionable quiet, the way old friends do when a friendship has changed shape, but not substance. The next week, Mirabelle sat at the head of a community meeting in a library room that smelled faintly of dust and lemon oil. There were folding chairs and a temperamental projector. People asked ordinary questions that often go unasked. How do I confirm an alibi without getting my nephew in trouble with his boss? What happens if a store's camera fails again? Who pays for the upgrade? How do we know training isn't just a video and a quiz? She answered plainly. The liaison hour is real. Here's a phone number and what to say when you call. The city has a small fund for replacement cameras tied to cases. Here is how the application works. The training is tracked by outcomes. The dashboard is public. We expect it to be boring most of the time and meaningful all the time. After, a woman in an orange work shirt lingered until the room was nearly empty. I'm not here about any case, she said. I just want to say it helps to hear the questions in public. It makes me feel like if something happened to my boy, it wouldn't disappear. It shouldn't, Mirabelle said. We won't get it perfect, but we can get it honest. On a late autumn morning, a case landed on Mirabelle's calendar that reminded her of why she had written the memo in the first place. A store clerk's ID was shaky. The video was crisp. The logs were clean. The canvas found the jacket. The officer's request for additional units was documented and granted. The defense still had arguments. The state still had gaps. But the trial felt like a bridge built to code rather than one held up by hope and habit. The verdict, guilty on one count, not guilty on another, read like a measured line rather than a swing. Nobody cheered. Nobody stormed. People stood, gathered their things, and walked back into life that would, for better or worse, continue. That evening, Mirabelle returned to chambers and reached, without looking, for the cabinet where Clara's postcard hid. She didn't need to see the words. It was enough to know they were there. On the second anniversary of the verdict, she drove to the ditch at Arroyo Verde. The water was low, as always. The cottonwoods held their leaves with that soft, rattling sound that belongs to the stretch of land and no other. She sat on the hood of her car and let the day lay itself out. Somewhere behind her, a boy cursed a knot in another decade. Somewhere ahead, a woman she did not yet know would stand in her courtroom and need the space a question can open. She had thought, once, that justice was pronouncement. She knew now it was a set of acts performed in order, repeated until they added up to something a person could stand on. It was a house you lived in and repaired in the same breath. It was a bench polished by hands that meant to steady themselves and steady others. It was a shop bay bright with afternoon, a socket that fit, a bolt that finally turned without breaking. When twilight cooled the metal beneath her, she slid off the hood and drove back toward town. The courthouse steps took the weight of her feet the way they always did. She set her palm on the mesquite rail. The wood felt warm, familiar, honest. All rise, the bailiff said. People stood. Good morning, Judge Mirabelle Ortiz said, and meant it. The next case began. The questions were ready. The house held. And somewhere under a tin roof, a radio played low while a man tightened a last bolt and turned out shop light one bay at a time.